because of our secrets and our lies. They're practically what define us. When the truth offends, we lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.
That was a small clip from the last episode of the TV show called Chernobyl. Now, usually I don't tell people to go watch some shows on my channel, but I will make an exception this time because it's only 6 episodes and it has made an excellent representation of what the culture behind the Iron Curtain was like. It's a good warning for people to know how my parents lived and not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And as a person who also lived through socialism, I can tell you, looking at Britain, it is incredibly concerning. First of all, it was the political correctness where a lot of police officers said that the reason they didn't want to arrest grooming gangs is because they didn't want to be called racist. Now, obviously, political correctness started as a way not to offend or not to insult people, but as we can see in Britain, it has reached heights which actually led to victims being committed, because every country has its criminals, every country has its organized crime, but I'm not aware of such high level of grooming gangs to happen anywhere else in Europe than it did in the United Kingdom. Certainly not the police saying that the reason they didn't go after them, even if they knew they existed, is because they didn't want to be called racist. So they had to lie and lie and lie, but the truth was still there. And then it exploded because eventually the truth comes out and the damage is a lot bigger than had it been acted the moment people found out about the truth. Now, it seems that the people at the BBC didn't learn the lesson, and there are BBC bosses accused of sanitizing the news, telling the journalists to not use the word terror unless they are quoting someone else. Now, I find this to be incredibly interesting, okay? Like, a terrorist attack, even though a lot of people will think about 9/11, they will think about some bombings, what it really means is any use of violence in order to push a political agenda. So that's what differs, for example, a person that goes on a killing spree with no political agenda than someone who does something in order to accomplish some legislative change, all right? So the word terrorist is very aptly defined. Now, the reason that they don't want the public to find out about this is that, okay, you know, like sometimes it can happen once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, but at one point you're going to start pressuring the authorities. You're going to say, well, we pay our taxes in order for you to keep us safe. We pay our taxes in order to make sure that law and order is being applied. And while certainly some criminals can evade the law, you then start to ask, like, how many times until you can blame the authorities? And it's not just the authorities, it's also the people in power, the establishment. And then you start raising the question, is it because the establishment allows this to happen, or is it because they're incompetent? And I guess the BBC wants to shield the British politicians, the establishment, from this level of criticism. And instead they pretend that, oh, it's for some, I don't know, to keep the Muslim population safe or something like that. From my personal experience, it seems that people are really angry at the establishment. They're really angry at the people in charge rather than being angry at Muslims. And this is interesting because I had this conversation about journalists with a couple of friends of mine. And this is the problem with journalism that we have today. Now, you can have private journalists like corporations, multi-million-dollar corporations, or you can have journalists that operate from the taxpayer money like you have in Sweden, in my country, the BBC, so on and so forth. Now, the problem is that the journalists that are for profit, they try to get the clickbait. They try to go for the rage-inducing articles. They try to push a certain ideology that will somehow eventually make them cash. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that because they're still a for-profit corporation. And you have the capitalist market where at least you have like different type of news. You don't like watching CNN, you can watch Fox News, okay? Like you have the choice. But what people need to understand that overall, all these companies are there to make money. All right, so that's their first priority. Like making money is their primary motivator. It's not necessarily to do anything else. The second type of when you talk about the BBC, well, they have a different motivation, and usually their motivation is to, as you can see here, shield the government from criticism because the government is their boss. Like the government can just pass a legislation that would force the BBC to start selling advertisers, to start selling ads, and as such, they won't have the people to just give them handouts. They won't be able to exist just because they're breathing. They're going to have to start worrying about the ratings. They're going to start worrying about everything else that the common plebs who work at the private sector do. And because of that, they constantly need to show the establishment, they need to show the people in power why they're worthy of being kept around. And this happens to my country. Like if you are a Romanian, you would know just how deep this goes. Like in my country, we have the Romanian television network. And every time there is a news article that the opposition does something bad, they will hype it up. Like they just focus on what the opposition does bad. And the moment the people in power do something bad, they just ignore it or they go radio silence. So it's more of a political type of television where they constantly attack the opposition. And the moment you have the elections and the opposition manages to get in power and the people in power become the opposition, it all flips overnight, usually. It is just insanely funny to watch. Now, this used to happen, by the way, 6 or 7 years ago. I don't know if they still do it now because I stopped watching television. But when you watch the BBC, it's also similar to a degree. You do notice that if you're an American, for example, and you watch the BBC in a matter of just hours, you will notice that it's very left-leaning. It's incredibly left-leaning. And a lot of their journalists, they're also members of political parties like Labour. And, you know, like, that is the problem with state-run journalism. I don't think that the state should be the one that is running a thing like the BBC. I think they all should be private networks. And I think that there should be competition. But anyway, so according to this article, reporters will be told to avoid using the word to describe any terror attack unless they are quoting someone else. Instead, they will refer to terror attacks by naming specific details such as the location and the method of slaughter used. So this is why we saw articles saying it's a truck attack. You know, it's really... Like I've never heard that phrase used before Nice, ever before. Like they coined it. Like trucks don't attack people. There's a driver, and the driver does it because of some reasons. And you as the press should inform the public of everything that happened without exaggerating or omitting details that are important. You should present the whole argument. But this is not what journalism is anymore. It's mainly to not report the facts, to bring information to the people, but tell people how to think. Guide the people towards the positive light. It's like that guy from Vox said, journalism is about gatekeeping. That's the most important job they have. So, apparently reporters would describe them as the London Bridge van attack or the Manchester Arena bomb. Now, this is from a publication that doesn't have much credibility, it's the Daily Mail. But I do read the BBC constantly, and I do notice that they're always doing this. Like they refuse to say terrorist attack anymore. They will always say like the bridge van attack, the London attack, or something like that. And you might say, well, V, you're a low IQ guy from Romania. Well, what do you know about this? Well, it seems that my opinion aligns with this guy, David Green, a former Home Office advisor and chief executive of the think tank Civitas. I don't know what it is, but they said if they don't want to use the word terror and they're failing in their public service duty, which is to be clear and accurate. I think there is a common usage which has some recognition in law, which is if you use attempt killing or injuring to a political objective, that is terrorism. It would be misleading not to say that these are terrorist episodes if they are attempts to advance a political or ideological cause through violence. So they talk about the one in New Zealand, which was someone a bit wacky, but he was trying to make a political point, and all the Islamist episodes are in that political outcome. Yeah, like the one in New Zealand was 100% a terrorist attack. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen said they are terrorists and these are the terrorist attacks. The BBC should not try to sanitize the behavior of terrorists by not calling it out. They're just putting it under the rug. You know, they're just like trying to pretend it didn't happen. So this is the one that really shocked me. According to a well-placed BBC sources, bosses are eager to report the terror attacks consistently, regardless of the terrorist political ideology, but instead of branding them all as terror attacks and risk accusations of bias, it wants to avoid the word together because a senior news source said it boils down to that phrase: one man terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. How can you think like that, right? Like, I hope this is not true. I hope this is just the Daily Mail that is pushing nonsense, because if this is genuinely what you're thinking, let's say you have the London Bridge attack, and you're saying, okay, well, we can't call it a terrorist because we're going to offend the British citizens that are reading the BBC who think that the guy is a freedom fighter. Like, that is incredibly immoral. I don't even know how else to pronounce it. Like, if you're a British citizen, clearly from you're a terrorist. Now, I would understand if some other newspaper somewhere halfway around the world considers that person a freedom fighter, you know, like that's something else. But we're talking about from the perspective of the BBC, which is paid by the British taxpayer. Anyway, do let me know what you think, and remember, watch Chernobyl. It's a really good TV show. I highly recommend it.